On reading the gospel, I think it's plain to see what Jesus is getting at. He provides this image of the vineyard and the tenants, and I think it's easy to see that he is the heir. He's the son that the Father sent, who was rejected, cast out of the city, and put to death. And I think that's relatively easy for us to see, to make the connection. But how does the gospel relate in our lives? What may the Lord be trying to tell us with this scripture passage, besides how it relates to Jesus? So there was this man from Grand Forks, North Dakota, and he robbed the First Community Bank in Fargo. After he left with the money, police were called, and upon receiving the ransom note, they realized that it had been written on the robber's bank deposit slip, complete with his name and address. In other not-so-bright criminal news, a man walked into a liquor store with a shotgun and demanded all the money from the cash register. After the cashier put the money in the bag, the man asked for a bottle of fine scotch from behind the counter. The cashier refused because he didn't look like he was 21 years old. So the robber swore that he was, and finally he handed over his driver's license to prove it. As soon as the robber left, the cashier was able to give the police the robber's name and address. A man broke into a home and stole, among other things, New Orleans Saints season tickets. The police arrested the man the following Sunday at the Superdome, sitting in the homeowner's seats. A group of tenants killed their landlord's son, believing that the dead man's land and inheritance would go to them. That last foolish criminal story comes from today's gospel, and unless we're vigilant, the report may end up with our name on it. Who among us has never yearned for a get-rich-quick scheme that really works? Many of us confine our longings to be wealthy to our daydreams, but some buy lottery tickets and hope against all odds. Others gamble in casinos in the holidays. Still others invest in stocks that promise astronomical profits. No one can argue that the lure of wealth is great. However, most of those who seek the get-rich-quickly plan will fail miserably. They'll lose their money and focus, and maybe even their family, as their obsession overtakes reason and their resources. Most of those who seek to possess more and more will end up being possessed more and more by what they have, becoming owned by what they own. Like most get-rich-quick schemes, the plan of the vineyard tenants in today's parable is widely improbable. I mean, they've been laboring on someone else's land and bringing in the grapes season over season. The contract all along has been to turn the harvest over to the landowner when the produce is ready. But as the grapes become more desirable, it occurs to the workers that they'd like to keep the harvest for themselves. And why not? A reasonable person may give a dozen good reasons why not. But the tenants, we understand, are not reasonable people. They're greedy people. And greed makes us all stupid when we surrender ourselves to its addictive power. All the tenants can think of is how wonderful it would be to profit from these grapes, to make their own wine, and to hold on to this fertile land. I mean, they actually talk themselves into the fantasy that they might legitimately possess the land if the sun and the air is out of the way. And to achieve this, they're willing to commit violence, even willing to commit murder. Now, I imagine that they didn't start out this way. For if that was the case, the landowner wouldn't have given them the contract, wouldn't have allowed them to begin this work. So I think it's safe to say that this fantasy played out over a long period of time, until it finally possessed them. Somewhere along the way, these tenants, they lose perspective, and then finally they lose themselves. They lose their innocence, their good names, and all the righteousness that was due to them for the hard work that they put into the land. Greed turns them into criminals. And far from possessing the dreams of wealth, they face the possibility of losing their very lives in judgment for their foolish actions. So ends this very sad tale of the tenants in the vineyard. So what can we take, pun intended, from today's gospel parable? And I think it's this. Friends, everything that we have, our breath, our intelligence, our body, our creativity, our skills, have been given to us by God. Everything in the world, everything in creation should remind us that we are not the landowners. We're the tenants. For us Americans, this can sometimes be a hard truth to accept. For we put so much emphasis on personal autonomy, right? My rights. It's my life. It's my liberty. My happiness, my choice, my purposes. The biblical truth is that at the end of the day, we really own nothing. What do we have that hasn't been provided by God? What we have, everything is a gift from God. Just like the vineyard in the gospel was a gift to the tenants to work. And he gave it to them to be a vineyard. But they wanted to make something else of what God gave them. The owner has given the vineyard to the tenants to take care of it, to work it, to use their minds, their creativity, their energy, their will, to make it fruitful and to even contribute to their own flourishing. Because the work in the vineyard wasn't only for the landowner, but it was actually for the workers as well to profit. But to do so, always remembering that the vineyard, the world, is not theirs. And it's not ours. Friends, we live in an incredible world, filled with so much beauty and life and mystery, created by God for His purposes. But when we try to turn it to our purposes, just turn on the news. As soon as we think and act that this world and the things of the world are for me, for my purposes, for my benefit, then we become like the tenants. The tenants who forgot where it all came from and to whom it all belongs. So as we reflect on this gospel scene and placing ourselves into the mix, we should acknowledge that the tenants in the parable had a pretty good deal when you think about it. But instead of enjoying the vineyard that God prepared for them, they wanted it all for themselves, to make it what they wanted it to be. Well, the good news this week is that there is only one God, and it's not me, and it's not you. We're invited to work for Him. We're the tenants.